Elise and Jen from Red Hot Irons for organising the meeting. Hooray! Woo! And I'd rather like to thank the hotel staff for looking after us over dinner so well. So very willing. So those are the thanks. I've offended lots of people because I haven't thanked them, but you know, there was a lot on that. So I was going to say, by way of starting, that I've enjoyed greatly the endocrinology CPD that I've managed to acquire today, as agreed on my PDP with my appraiser for this year. Even if it did involve getting up at 4:30 a.m. to get into a taxi that... The guy was colourblind. He didn't. When it came to traffic lights, it didn't matter what colour it was. He just kept his foot down. But it was fascinating. Anyway, so what we'd like to know in due course, not necessarily immediately, is whether this little initiative of piggybacking the ABCD meeting onto the end of the BES meeting and having a sort of a hybrid day on the Wednesday of the BES meeting is something you would like to do again. You know why it was done, because of the potential conflict with BES and detracting from the appeal of ABCD when people had to go from one part of the UK to another within a day or so. And so this was deliberately organised by Russell to overcome that objection to people coming. So hopefully it will work, and hopefully you found it a positive experience. But we'd like to know whether it's something you want to do ever again, next year or forever, or perhaps every 3 years or something like that. And tell Russell in particular, and he will think about those answers. So, what else have I said I want to say? I just thought it was rather uncanny that ABCD events seem to coincide with world-changing events. Try the ABCD Clinical and Commissioning Live inaugural event on the 23rd of June. 23rd of June was the day of the EU referendum. And who'd have thought it? And then when I set my alarm for this morning and woke up, the first thing I did was to switch on the radio to find out the score in the test match from...
yes.
Oh, yes, and then the US presidential election. No, it's okay, Becky, I won't. Anyway, what else have I got to say to you? I don't know. I was going to. I brought this actually, just on a whim. I don't know how many of you read this book. Now you won't be able to see, but it's called "The Diabetic Life" by R.D. Lawrence. Hands up if you've read it.
I've got a copy in my office.
So this is smattering, but it is the minority, isn't it? And this is by R.D. Lawrence, and this happens to be the 12th edition reprint with wartime supplement in it. And that's really rather unusual in itself. But I saved it from being burnt. Now, I didn't know that librarians burn books, but this was going off to be burnt as they were having a clear out from our local medical society. So I said, well, I wouldn't mind that. And so I got it. So it's still got the library sticker on it, but I haven't stolen it, honestly. I've rescued it, and I've actually got a receipt that I signed for it. So I thought, if I might, just distract you for a minute by reading a couple of things out of it. And I was going to start with reading the bit about the preface to the reprint of the 12th edition by the man himself, R.D. Lawrence. You will all know that R.D. Lawrence was a doctor. And you will know that he eventually jointly founded the Diabetic Association, which became the British Diabetic Association, which became Diabetes UK, exactly so. So that was he did have diabetes himself and was one of the first people in Britain to receive insulin. So what he says is, preface to the 12th edition, he says, I cannot let this reprint pass without a reference to the recent tragic death of Sir Frederick Banting, the discoverer of insulin. We diabetics know we owe our lives to him. No words can express our thankfulness and admiration for his life and work. Then he goes on to talk about the war. The war has brought many problems and some special difficulties to diabetics, mainly concerned with food rationing. They are dealt with in a wartime supplement at the beginning of the book, and I earnestly hope the need for it will pass before another edition is required. So that I thought was fun. So I thought I'd see what that wartime rationing was all about. Well, the first bit was about insulin supplies, etc. Diabetics, he says, can rest assured that in spite of some bombing losses, manufacturing problems, nothing on this, bombing losses, there are plentiful stocks of insulin in Britain, and the manufacture goes on as before. Now, some people manufacture insulin in Britain. True, distribution has been and may be temporarily upset, and it is wise to have a small stock of insulin, at least a month's supply, in hand. Most diabetics have already seen to this, and there should be no sudden rush to hoard large stocks of insulin, as this is certain to cause local shortage. And then he goes on to talk about price and different strengths and makes of insulin. It all comes around, doesn't it? A recent increase in prices occurred as the costs of producing pancreas, bottles, etc., have risen by 50 to 200%. Glass for insulin bottles is a difficulty, and empty bottles should be saved and returned to the chemist, where new supplies are bought. Because, of course, the date of this was before me. Anyway, the increase in price is enormously different in the different strengths of insulin solutions, owing to the large part that glass and packing plays in the costs of production. Different strengths of insulin. It's all coming back to haunt us. There you are, that was the war. And it goes on about food and things. And here we have emergency sugar ration, because, of course, sugar was rationed, wasn't it? When diabetics are suffering from nausea and sickness, particularly likely to occur when threatened by acetone poisoning, brackets, ketosis, close brackets, they may be quite unable to eat their usual diet, but must take carbohydrate food to balance their insulin. Blah, 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 blah. Many diabetics carry lump sugar to eat in case of insulin reactions, but no special rationing provision is made for this. They should remember that similar quantities of glucose or boiled sweets are equally effective. You see, hypoglycemia management, again, it's all the same stuff. So there we are. Preface to the first edition. I can't let this go without. It is the object of this book to bring the modern treatment of diabetes by diet and insulin within the scope of the general practitioner and the understanding of the patient, whose intelligent cooperation is necessary for the best results. The busy doctor has been apt to think the accurate treatment too complicated and too time-absorbing for him, note, and has left the matter largely to specialists. But now sufficient knowledge has accumulated to make it possible to lay down simple rules of treatment without being too dogmatic. And he goes on to talk about the line ration diet and how useful that is. He says, I make no apology to doctors for writing a combined book for them and their patients, for the latter invariably come to know a great deal about their illness, at any rate where details of diet are concerned. Some chapters are written more especially for doctors and others for patients, but it is hoped that most of them will be helpful to both. So he goes on. But he makes a really dramatic statement in the next paragraph. 5 years ago, The Diabetic Death would have been a more suitable title for such a book as this. But now modern discoveries, particularly insulin, have completely changed the outlook. There is no reason why a diabetic should not, if he can be taught to do so, lead a long and normal life, so on and so forth. But there we are. So there's quite a lot of familiar things in a very different time and political context. So pretty much relevant, I thought. So good. He goes on in the book, he mentions different sorts of insulin, and 4 years before this book was written there was only one sort of insulin, basically soluble insulin or acid soluble insulin, okay? And this would have been beef, possibly pork at the time. And he mentions two new insulins. He mentions the Danish protamine insulin, or retard, the Danish insulin. It sounds a bit like Hamlet, doesn't it? And he laments the fact that this only lasts 12 hours, so it has to be given twice a day. Okay? Whereas fortunately, zinc protamine insulin, discovered in Toronto, acts easily for 24 hours and so can be given once a day. Hooray! Yes, we've heard that recently too, haven't we? Anyway, so there we go. I did make the mistake of mentioning the presidential elections, didn't I, just a minute ago? And you'll be relieved to know that this is the last time I'll be speaking to you as chair of the organisation. But you will have a new chair, I assure you, in Belfast. And our General Secretary is about poised to send out requests for nominations. So please do give this some serious, but not too serious, thought. I think I would like your indulgence to reflect on the last 2.5 years. I've been reminded already that in Cardiff I spoke about pink balls, swinging and retaining their hardness. And I did do that, I have to confess. Most misguidedly, I stood up and recited Stanley Holloway monologue with John Wales sat next to me, and that was misguided. But we'll gloss over that. There have, however, I think, been seriously some achievements. Well, we're still here as an association, and I think that's a good achievement. We now have adopted IPN UK, the UK Insulin Pump Network, and that is now thriving, and really, under Emma Wilmot's chairmanship, is doing well. The journal is thriving. Now that we've got rid of the VD, I think it's going to do even better. And my thanks to Paul, Chris, Parth, and to Marie-France Kong, and to Tricia and her team for producing that journal. Keep the articles coming through, please. The clinical work streams have been very productive, and very good guidelines have been produced on Type 1 standards, which will form the basis of our right care optimal pathway in due course. And I can now say that discussions have now come to a point where I can announce that ABCD will be taking measures to set up a Type 1 clinical network along the lines of the IPN UK network, and with the support and knowledge and assistance of Diabetes UK and others. So please stand by for more information about that in the next few weeks. I think that JBDS IP, which is half funded by ABCD, has been tremendously productive, and our clinical work streams have worked very productively with them. So Peter's renal work stream, the Renal Association work, has been absolutely fantastic, and please come to the February 28th of February conference in Birmingham, joint conference with the Renal Association. So put a note in your diaries now. We have consistently engaged with NICE, the consultations. Some of them have been a little bit more controversial than others. I mean, the Type 2 guidance was, of course, very straightforward, but you will still be there at 9 o'clock tomorrow for the debate, won't you? We've produced some important position statements. We've revisited pioglitazone in the wake of the papers on bladder cancer. And we've just put something on the website, or about to put something on the website, Bob, about SGLT2 inhibitors and the risk of diabetic ketoacidosis. All these are very relevant to practicing diabetologists and those in primary care. And the website itself is in the process of being transformed, thanks to Andy and to Bob and to Trish, and all of that wealth of material on the website in diabetes.org is being made available through abcd.care as we speak. And that's a mammoth task, so I'm grateful to everyone for that. So what else? The audits, the nationwide audits, absolutely fantastic. They go from strength to strength, more being added every few months. And the ABCD funded research project into endobarrier is now producing some fantastic results and getting interest from all around the world. So these are really good things. Anyway, that's enough. So I want finally to thank my executive colleagues, so to Tony, Chris, Dinesh, and of course Russell, again as he's sitting next to me. The wider ABCD committee, the trustees for the Diabetes Care Trust, the Secretariat, Westport Islands, believe it or not, the accountants, for their hard work and their support of me, and for you, the membership. It's always been a privilege to do this, and sometimes a pleasure. Raise your glasses, please, to ABCD. ABCD. Cheers.